Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Welcome to another Supatease video, and in this one, we're going to be reviewing the Survival Hunter, the only remaining spec for Hunter to survive in PvP for basically the entirety of Battle for Azeroth. And then in PvE, the spec that everyone kind of wished you were just BM for Mythic Plus. It's an awesome spec in my mind. It's one of the most fun and engaging specs in Battle for Azeroth, and not a lot is really changing, so it's still likely to remain the case. If you enjoyed Survival Hunter and Battle for Azeroth, you'll continue to enjoy it in Shadowlands. If your only prerogative is top damage and you couldn't compete with BM hunters at the end of Battle for Azeroth and no one was inviting you to survival, then you probably don't care about my opinion on it being fun and engaging, but the main purpose of these reviews is to give my own opinion of whether or not this is a spec that I feel I could personally play for a long period of time without getting bored, because in my mind, that's going to be the most important factor to selecting the spec that I want to play for Shadowlands. I think it should be the main priority for most people, because you're pretty much dedicated to a spec, definitely a class, but also a spec in a way, and you want to make sure that you're picking one that's going to be fun and engaging for you, and it's going to last a long time, so you don't get bored of your selection after putting so much time grinding into the character and the covenant. So initially, let's just go through what's coming back to survival. These are things that are coming back for all hunter specs, but for survival at the moment, Arcane Shot is coming back. Similarly, Serpent Sting is a weapon that would normally require a ranged weapon, right? And when I press it, you can see my character pulls out a little crossbow and puts up a Serpent Sting. So I'm curious if that's what they're going to do with Arcane Shot. To me, Survival Hunter already has so many abilities that it's juggling when it's attacking down here that it seems a bit redundant. You would really only ever use this to maybe kill a totem in PvP that's far away, maybe like a Psy Fiend. It's just an immediate extra bit of ranged damage. Maybe if somebody was out of range and you didn't have your aspect to activate and go ranged on them, you'd be able, to me it doesn't really fit with what they want to do with survival. It's almost the reverse of what melee survival was in the past, where if you were a hunter attacking with melee weapons, you were a meme. Now you're a melee hunter attacking ranged, and it's a meme. I don't entirely think it needs to come back. And I mean, I'm somebody who is like pro unpruning, but it's something that it feels like it should be a weakness if you're playing survival and it's predominantly a melee spec, even if they did manage to incorporate it by just you use this little dinky crossbow to shoot an arcane shot at someone that's out of range of your normal melee attacks. It does give you extra range if that's what they intend to do with it, but at the moment it seems like it's just being neglected. Eyes of the Beast is back. It's really not a big deal, right? It's Eagle Eye, you can scout things out, and RP if you're into that. Not something that I do a lot, but if you do, all to you. Hunter's Mark is back baseline. It's just damage to the target. I love Hunter's Mark. It's got good counterplay to stealth classes as well. So if you know a rogue is sneaking around, just put a Hunter's Mark on them. You can track them more easily, or a druid, or even potentially a mage if they're sneaking away with invisibility. To me, it's a very high skill cap spell in PvP. I'm glad that it's back in that regard. I've seen complaints in PvE because it's something that you have to press before you start maximizing your damage. And I see that as a pretty big complaint against a lot of specs in PvE, is basically if you're pressing anything that doesn't do your main AoE damage instantly, then it's annoying. That's how the opinion comes across to me when I see people saying, well, I have to press Hunter's Mark and then start attacking. Well, everybody, it's true in one way that other people don't, and then their damage is more immediate. And if the monsters die before you get to your peak rotation, because you have to use Hunter's Mark before you start doing damage, I can understand why it's a big detriment. But it's also somewhat annoying to me that the solution to that problem is to remove ramp from everyone, so everybody is just immediately mashing their 3 damage buttons. I enjoy ramp. I think that it's important. Like, who do you want to designate the Hunter's Mark to? Did you remember to switch it over to the next target before engaging? I personally like debuff management and more depth to the class than just I'm pressing my 3 AoE buttons. So for me personally, I like Hunter's Mark coming back. I can see the validity of the arguments that I've seen raised against it just being like, it should just automatically apply when you attack, well, then it's going to lose its utility benefit in PvP, because then you would have to hit the target. Is it going to apply to every target you hit? It seems like it needs to either be the way that it is or not come back at all, but I would personally rather it stays the way that it is. It has good synergies with some of the conduits when we get to the conduit section. Scare Beast is back, so all of those shamans that are running around in Ghost Wolf, although their Azerite trait that made them super powered in Ghost Wolf doesn't exist, you can outplay those shamans, you can outplay the druids, you can Scare Beast other hunter pets, try and prevent Roar of Sacrifice or other utility from their pets. So this is some nice utility in PvP that's coming back. In PvE, maybe if there's a specific mob that's a beast that you can crowd control, you'll be able to have that. You already have Freezing Trap, which works on everything, and it's instant. So in PvE, it seems like if you're going to start the pull crowd controlling, you're just going to use Freezing Trap. You don't have the downside of the thing running off into another pull and then everything aggroes because it's a fear. So in PvE, it's not really that great, and warlocks can already fear beasts, so it's not like you're getting some huge advantage over a warlock fear. It's an incredibly limited fear when you already have, like, in my mind, the best instant crowd control in PvE for an extra mob that spawns that needs to be controlled or at the start of a pull. So it's more like a niche use in PvP, which for me personally I like. Steady Shot is very similar to Arcane Shot. I don't know why it needs to be. It's like Arcane is supposed to be the spender, and then Steady is the builder. But you've already got spenders on your focus. So, like, are you just gonna? I mean, myself personally, I like having a lot of buttons, but adding these into your already solid, like, rotation of melee abilities doesn't seem necessary. I almost wonder if Arcane Shot should be like a 12-second cooldown or something, so you can use it as that, like, little bit of instant range damage, so it has its niche PvP uses. Maybe some PvE as well. If the mob spawns a totem that needs to be killed really far away, you just turn over and snipe it without having to use a big cooldown to become ranged with Arcane Shot. But having Steady Shot as a builder, I guess if you were running away from an engagement, or, I mean, if it was a fight like on Nixia where you can't hit it with melee attacks, you would want these. But they're going to have to incorporate it the same way that Serpent Sting is, where you pull out your little crossbow. And I would imagine that they should scale them so they're not as strong as your melee attacks. So you have the option to use these ranged abilities, but they're never actually, you don't want to be using them over your melee attacks is where I think that they should be placed. But right now they just seem to be totally neglected. Maybe they'll look at it later. The final one, which a lot of PvP hunters are going to be really happy about coming back, is Tranquilizing Shot, being able to remove magic effects. So in BFA, it was only in Rage. Now that it's magic effects, things like Paladins are a lot weaker against you. You can run the risk of removing their Divine Favor, their Blessing of Protection. Same thing with the synergies with Warrior. Warrior getting Shattering Throwback, being able to remove Ice Blocks and Divine Shields, means that Warrior Hunter synergy that was lost because those are the utilities that let you beat certain classes were removed is coming back. So there's potential for Hunter to have more composition options because it can remove magic effects. It doesn't need to be playing with a Priest to do that for them, or a Shaman to do that for them. It can do it somewhat, right? It's a 10-second cooldown. You're running a little bit of a gamble, but you can at least do it. In PvE, you've got Purge option, I guess, on a cooldown, so it would be like you're competing for a spot with Shamans and Priests in dungeons. In raids, it's probably not a really big deal, but it's going to have a little bit of a place there. And they liked Enrage mechanics a lot in BFA dungeons, so having Tranquilizing Shot or Soothe from a Druid is usually a nice thing to have. If they scale it in a way that it's mandatory to have, then you would always get a spot in those dungeons with Survival Hunter, but there's a lot of skill cap to this ability aside from just doing damage. And you can see that it doesn't require a ranged weapon. No, it does. It says that it doesn't, but when I press it, it does. So there's something going on that's a little bit fishy with these abilities. Aside from that, there's really nothing changing other than, oh, well, I guess this is a big one. Kill Shot. This is a fun spell. Any execute ability, there's some sort of satisfaction when you see a mage at 20% health and you just Kill Shot. You're dead. Playing way back in like Mists of Pandaria, like Kill shot was a satisfying ability, and you get it as survival. Again, they'll have to incorporate it with that little crossbow if they want to utilize it, but getting an execute back is amazing for survival. So you've got finishing power now. You don't need to rely on playing with another class that potentially has finishing power. Overall, I think survival hunter is being put in a place where its PvP options for what classes it can play is opening up. In terms of PvE, it's just numbers, right? Does it do more damage than BM? Does it do more damage than MM? It has the same utility. I mean, you're not really bringing anything else over those specs, so it's always just going to be which of those 3 specs does the most damage, and I can't give you that information because they haven't tuned anything yet. But overall, it's a fun spec. I really like the bombs, the animations, the feel of it, maintaining dots. Now you've got an execute in your rotation. I think that it is a fun spec overall. The main reason that I've never mained it in the past really is that it was so limited on composition options without having the purge and other classes not having abilities to remove immunities. Now that all of those utilities are coming back to the classes, its composition options in PvP open up a lot more. So it is something that I am considering. I'm still a little bit hesitant to pull the trigger on anything. Get it? Because it's a hunter. Whatever. I'm a little bit hesitant to make a choice just yet, but it's definitely on the top for the tier list that I'm going to be constructing later on. When you look at the talents, it's mostly just tuning. There's nothing really new. They basically just buffed talents that were never taken in an attempt to try and help you to take them. But most of them are like this one where you always took Mongoose Bite. It's still whatever the numbers tell you, and you go to a website, you type in Google which talent does the most damage, it'll tell you, and then you usually just always picking it. So not really much choice in that regard with what the changes are coming here. The only other significant utility would be something like Binding Shot, which isn't obviously new, but I just thought it would be worth talking about. It's a root that doesn't break on damage. So if there's monsters that need to be kited by your tank, you could get a spot in those groups because of Binding Shot. Same thing in PvP. Synergy with classes chasing down targets and wanting to get a root that doesn't break on damage for like mages or something. There's nice synergies. There's nothing new on the honor talent section either, so not really anything exciting. Some of the bigger downsides, I guess, of new things, if you want to call them new, is a bad thing new. Your revive pet's really long cast, basically. It used to be longer than this. I think it used to be 6. I don't know if it's 4 seconds for survival and then 6 for the ranged specs, but 4 seconds is still really long. So things to take into account with that changing is that a PvP talent, PvEers don't care right now, but a PvP talent like Roar of Sacrifice, where your damage is redirected to your pet, if the pet dies, it's going to be really annoying to get it back. So Roar of Sacrifice may be losing value just due to the risk of your pet actually dying. I just thought that would be something to take into account. Your pet management's going to matter a lot more. But let's look at the new stuff, right? There hasn't been a lot really changing here for Hunter. There's been a lot of good sides, but nothing uniquely to survival. But these are new things that are coming. For Kyrians, you get the resonating arrow. You just fire the arrow in the ground, and then in the circle, you can hit anybody. And if that circle is around line of sight, then you can hit them through line of sight as well. You get 30% increased critical strike chance against them. When they were first announcing Covenant abilities, I thought, wow, this is insane. Hunters get to shoot through pillars. Maybe less so for survival, but for other things like marksman. I don't think it's going to end up being as great as it seems. In PvE, you're just getting the benefit of the crit chance. But in general, at survival, your main stat priority is versatility or haste and versatility in PvE. You generally don't like mastery, but crit would also be like the second worst. And then in PvP, you really don't care about crit. So to me, this ability is not great for survival, PvE or PvP, because you're in melee range anyway. You don't care really about line of sight in PvE unless you're going to spawn monsters that run behind walls, which I really doubt. It's just not really helpful, and it's not going to have a lot of power behind it in any part of the game. So if you're looking at Kyrian Hunter, my first view here is kind of just probably not. You still get the Steward, you get some extra healing and the ability to remove dots, but you already get a lot of that through some of the new utility on the Conduits and Legendaries and Honor talents. So it's not really benefiting you too much. You're never really standing still very long as survival, so some of the soul binds that you would get from Kyrian, like stun reductions, you won't really get to benefit from either. I would put that this is kind of just really risky if you wanted to run Kyrian Hunter overall in the game, not even just PvP specifically. Venthyr is a really solid option. It's similar to passives that like rep paladins have or warriors have, so you can get like your big execute at a higher margin of health. You fire a shot, it causes them to bleed. You get a dot. I like dot management. It's already kind of selling itself to me. It does shadow damage, so you don't need to worry about armor. You have 15% chance to gain Flayer's Mark, causing your next kill shot to be usable on any target, regardless of their health. So again, you get to it's a half the cooldown of the Kyrian one. Is it dispellable? I would probably argue it probably is, dealing shadow damage, so it's probably a magic dot. So people could look to dispel it, but then they won't be able to dispel other things. It's not going to be as high of a priority as other Venthyr abilities, certainly. It doesn't like silence the target when you put it on it, like the mage one with the mirrors. So it's probably not a super high priority dispel dot. And it's just overall solid, just getting to use your execute at a higher margin. It's going to be great for single target. You get extra mobility with the Door of Shadows from picking Venthyr. You get a lot of the extra increased damage modifiers from Venthyr. I feel like the opinions of most people is that their Soulbind Conduits are the highest throughput, if only by even just a slight margin. So taking that into consideration, I feel like this looks like a fun option and a good solid one. Necrolord Covenant ability. This is the coolest one animation wise. I'm kind of glad that it's there, especially when you use it on a single target. It's the most interesting. So you throw out this glaive, and if it's a single target, it just like runs through them over and over and over and over and over like a possessed chainsaw, hacking them down. It does a lot of damage. The downside is that if there's more than one person standing next to it, it's going to start bouncing around. And in PvE, you might not care, right? Because it's just, it does damage to everybody. I don't care who I'm doing the damage to. But in PvP, if you wanted to focus it in on that one target, like you would be able to with Venthyr, you don't get that option with this. Hopefully it's crowd control smart, so that when it bounces, it doesn't bounce to a trap target. Otherwise, this is, I mean, it's, I want to say it's garbage, but you would then just only be able to use it when your freezing trap isn't out. It's going to limit it heavily if that's the case. You get, it increases with damage over time too, which is awesome. It's kind of unique in that effect. And then of course you get Fleshcraft, which at the moment, after it's been nerfed, the ultimate form Soulbind has been nerfed. It's more or less just a shield. You could try to utilize it to pre-shield some sort of incoming stun or polymorph. There could be a high skill cap there. So if you're more focused on PvP, to me, Necrolord stands out a bit better. It wouldn't be terrible in PvE. I still feel like Venthyr likely is going to come out ahead, but it's not a bad pick. I think it's a solid one. For Night Fae Hunter, you get Wild Spirits, which is very similar to Trick Shots on Marksman. I feel like it's becoming increasingly challenging for them to make new things. It feels like there's a lot of stuff that's just kind of like, that's that spell from that class with a different name and a different skin. And this is just very similar to Trick Shot for Marksman. So you'll put a circle on the ground and apply Wild Mark to them. It increases the damage you deal to everybody in it. And while it's active, each damaging ability you use against a Wild Mark strikes the target for extra damage. That's like the Trick Shot, right? When you hit it again. In PvE, this is probably great AoE. With Night Fae, you get the cheat death Soulbind. I feel like for a lot of classes, Night Fae is ending up to be really good for Mythic Plus. You would still be somewhat useful in PvP. I guess as long as you can separate the target, right? So if the enemy knows that you want to land a trap and you're playing Night Fae, they will move to their healer, and then you put this on the ground, and then you might break your trap. So it doesn't deal damage itself, though. So if it's crowd control smart, it wouldn't have that drawback. You get Soul Shape, which through Soulbinds, I think you can reduce damage taken to yourself, and you can just use it to blink around and avoid damage if you need to. Survival doesn't have as much mobility as others. I wouldn't say that it's incredibly lacking with Harpoon and Disengage, but getting a little bit extra definitely doesn't hurt. This seems like it would be okay if you wanted to go between anything in the game. Because it's AoE, I guess you wouldn't get as much benefit on a single target raid boss like you would the Venthyr, but you would get way more benefit in Mythic Plus. Like, to me, this has to be the Mythic Plus go, right? For survival. The crit AoE circle is probably better for BM because it's crit in PvE for dungeons, but in this seems like it would be really good. And then you get, of course, the soul shape and the cheat death for Mythic Plus. So a little bit more leaning to Mythic Plus, a little bit more leaning to PvP, leaning to both, and probably solid overall, and then just kind of sort of bad. It would be Kyrian for survival. And that's it for the Covenant abilities. We've got legendaries, though. And for the general legendary, so if you intend on switching between different specializations of Hunter, these would work well for you, hopefully, and you're not super competitive. Call of the Wild, the cooldown of all of your aspects, True Shot, and Coordinated Assault is reduced by 25%. Getting some nice burst windows more frequently is awesome. And you would also get your defense and your speed back 25% faster. Neziniwary's Trapping Apparatus. Whenever a trap is triggered, you gain 25 focus. This is probably the most lackluster, lame legendary ever. Just, what if you're already max focused because you were saving it up? Because to me, this stands out as like a PvP legendary, right? I actually think you only get it from PvP. You're usually pooling your focus, then you land a trap, and then you do damage, which then would mean the 25 focus is wasted because it would go above your capped focus. I guess if you're a good player, you would never be capped on focus, but you usually at least want to pool a little bit so you can burst after the healer stops healing. So it's to me, it's like a little bit of counterintuitive. Maybe some other Hunter mains that have played longer could counter argue that to me. Please in the comments down below. But to me, this is really lame, and it's from PvP. So if you're a PvP player, you're probably disappointed because this is the only legendary you'll get from only PvPing. And it's to me, it's lame in all aspects of the game. It's not really even functional for PvP specifically, let alone like good for anything in the game. This is really bad. I would just not even look at that. Soulforge Embers. This is the cool one. This is my favorite one. Launching a flare into your tar trap causes all enemies in the tar trap to burn for fire damage. So you can light people on fire. I love the interaction of these spells because flare is something that's like, you just find people in stealth. You don't really pay attention to it. It's like, it has that one niche use. Now it's like, both of these spells are ones that were just kind of like, but now when they synergize together, it does a lot of damage when I tested it. And in my mind, I really hope it ends up being a good throughput one because it's good for all specs of Hunter. It's good for most specs of content like AoE and dungeons. The only time it would be bad is single target on a boss. It's super fun and new. I don't think we've ever seen interactions like this with spells where you can literally light your spell on fire. It reminds me of like the wild mushrooms of Druid, Bounce Druid, where you would cast the mushroom on the ground and then blow it up after. It's kind of like that with a little bit more skill involved with it. I had a lot of fun with it, so hopefully it ends up being good. Craven Stratagem. Feign Death cooldown reduced by 15 seconds, and Feign Death now removes most negative status effects from yourself, so probably like damage over time effects. You already have, now obviously in PvE you don't, so you'll be getting that in PvE, but removes all harmful magic effects. So this legendary's secondary value wouldn't do anything. You would get 15 seconds off the cooldown, much like one of the minor Azerite traits, so you could do it every 15 seconds. So it could have a niche use in PvP, but in PvE, I just feel like it's not worth it to lose out on damage and other cool effects. So it's unfortunate. In PvP, niche use might be something you go for as a third legendary or something. Survival Hunter specific powers. These are likely the highest throughput. And again, these were also really lame. Honestly, they were really lame. Like the first one is literally just the Azerite power, the one that you kind of sort of didn't want. It was meh in dungeons, but you wanted latent poisons, which is literally this legendary. Making the Azerite traits a legendary is really lame. It's like you spent the entire expansion, Battle for Azeroth, grinding to unlock this, and then do it again. And it's a legendary? I don't feel legendary putting this on, or even reading it. This is what I was saying earlier. It seems like they're just kind of like putting out the same thing again, or a different iteration of something in the past. It seems like maybe they're stretched for time on trying to get Shadowlands out. So instead of just maybe baking this into the class as a passive and then coming up with a new legendary, it's like, well, just get this out. I mean, it could end up being good for dungeons, right? The same way that it was in BFA, but you have to give up a legendary slot. I mean, I just feel like the word legendary shouldn't even be attached to something like this. I'm not Rylax Stalkers. I was gonna say that I'm not even gonna bother to say that, but I said it right. All right, Confounding Strikes. Mongoose Bite and Raptor Strike have a 10% chance to reduce the cooldown of Wildfire Bomb. Again, these are all just gonna be throughput. So whatever does the most damage is the one that you want to go after. But I really like Wildfire Bomb, the way that it looks and feels. So this could be a fun one. But if it doesn't do more damage than the other ones, you probably don't take it. And then this one. Oh man, if you want to about lame. Latent poison injectors. They just added the word injectors after latent poison. So this in Battle for Azeroth with Serpent Sting applies latent poison. It stacks up. And then after it's stacked up to 10, you press Mongoose Bite and Raptor Strike. You consume it and it does damage. It's a pretty cool effect. But it's the effect that you've been playing with for the entirety of Battle for Azeroth. It's pretty much mandatory in all content. Like the highest Mythic Plus levels, Raid, PvP. It is a fun mechanic. But it's just like, you're going to spend time grinding for a legendary that was the same passive that you played for the entirety of the last expansion. Why? Why isn't this just a passive on survival? And then you get something cool and awesome, like lighting your tar trap on fire like that. The worst part about it is because it was so good at BFA, I think it's just going to end up being the best anyway. So your entire process of getting a legendary item is just going to be getting an Azerite trait. That's really disappointing to me personally. Butcher's Bone Fragments, Mongoose Bite, and Raptor Strike increases the damage of your next butchery and carve by 10%, stacking up to 10 times. Could be good for AoE depending on if it can compete with Wildfire Bomb. I mean, you don't have to wait for it to ramp up, right? You just dropping extra bombs. So in terms of like if this latent poison injector becomes a single target competition, this one again requires time to ramp, but this one is just immediate. So depending on how long fights go for, if they're elongated AoE fights, then yeah, this one would be nice. If they're quick AoE fights where things die fast, then that one's better. So you got to plan those legendaries out a little bit ahead of time, depending on the numbers, which you probably won't test unless you get the item. You're kind of just gambling on it, whether or not it's going to end up being the best. And all of these are just throughput, so that's a little bit disappointing. It's a cool effect. I like it. Like as you're fighting, you get stronger and your AoE gets better and better. And you'll be hammering down hard. But at the start of the expansion, when you're farming Mythic Zeros and trash dies instantly, it's not going to perform well. But later into it, when people stop caring about Mythic Zeros and you want to push high keys, then it might have really good AoE, especially on Fortified. So this could be the place for this. I like that it's somewhat different, I guess. I mean, for anyone that played Survival and Legion and utilized the legendary that it was based off of, maybe it's not. But at least there was more time between Legion and now than BFA and now. So the legendaries, I'm only really super excited about the one. Lighting the tar trap on fire. If I main Survival Hunter, is probably the one I would go for because it's fun and just hopefully it's not bad. And then the final thing we got to look at here are conduits, which are basically sockets that you're going to put into your Covenant. And you can only have one of each. Potency conduits are damage. So we're looking at damage conduits, and you can only have one of these per talent tree. So the first one is Deadly Tandem. Coordinated Assault's duration is increased. I don't know the math on that, and I don't know if that's the right number because it scales up. So 1,000% of what is it, like normally 30 seconds? You could run that cooldown reduction legendary to get some really big coordinated assaults and get them more frequently. That could be really good. But again, these are all just going to be needed to be tested and run through a sim machine to tell us which one's actually the best, unfortunately. Flame Infusion, Butchery and Carve increases the damage of your next Wildfire Bomb. Again, still good synergies with the legendaries for Wildfire Bomb if you wanted to build yourself that way. Be a Wildfire Bomb Survival Hunter with Night Fae for lots of AoE. You'd be desirable at the early parts of the expansion, definitely, where everything's about AoEing things down quickly. Mongoose Bite, Raptor Strike damage is increased, so just flat out single target pressure. Likely is good in PvP when you're just focusing on hammering down one target with traps on the healer, or a raid boss for single targets. So you could build yourself to be a combination of like this cooldown oriented focus on AoE and single target, but then lose some of this extra damage for everything. feel like you probably would want to focus if you're running 3 potencies, cooldown reduction, AoE, and single target. If you only get 2 potency options, then you're basically locking yourself into, I would think, cooldown reduction, AoE if you do dungeons more often, or single target if you raid and you do PvP. So you're kind of locking yourself in based on those situations. And then when kill command's cooldown is reset, you gain 3% increased damage. I don't know if this stacks. If it stacks, it's pretty good, but if it doesn't, then you're going to have to wait until really far into the expansion when this ranks up to be a higher amount of damage, I think, to be any good. But again, this is all simmed. I'm just trying to give you my opinions of where I think these would fit, depending on if you want to main it and which ones to go after in those cases. So you pretty much, I think, always going to want coordinated, anything to do with coordinated assault. AoE is much more beneficial in Mythic Plus, and then single target would be better for raids if they're all single target fights, and PvP for freezing trap and then burst damage. These are potency conduits that affect your soulbind conduits, so the Kyrian ability, the one that I was flaming, not because it's a firing arrow, but because it was not good. This conduit, let's see if it saves it. Your attacks and abilities deal 5% increased damage to enemies inside. Okay, maybe that does save it, because that ranks up. So it would be 5%, then up from that 8 point, 14 point per. So it could save Kyrian. The conduit could save it, because now it's not just crit damage or crit percent, and it's not shooting through line of sight. It's just flat out. You're gonna get more damage on the. But you have to give up one of these conduits for it to get that, to make the ability good. So just take that into consideration. Empowered release. So the Venthyr one, your flayed shot has an additional 5% chance to proc kill shot and increases the damage of your kill shot. In PvP, I feel like this is going to be really good. In Mythic Plus, you probably don't care. This now actually has a solid option. Or Night Fae is likely what you want to go for. To me, it's like Necrolord and Venthyr are more oriented to PvP in terms of their power. And then Night Fae is definitely, and then Kyrian potentially saves itself with this conduit for dungeons and Mythic Plus. But single target, this could still be good for raids. So it's good benefit. It's a lot of fun, especially in PvP. Like if you get a big buffed up kill shot, that could be a lot of damage, a lot of fun. Your Death Chakram generates an additional 2 focus, and it's just more damage on it. It still has the same downside where in PvP it bounces to new targets. In PvE you don't really care that much, but it would allow you a lot of focus generation. Spirit attunement, wild spirit's duration is increased, so you get more time with the circle on the ground, and the damage of all of the wild spirits that you trigger would be increased by 10%. To me, it's like Kyrian and Night Fae are basically the same ability. It's a circle on the ground, and it's just going to be which circle lets you do more damage. The other benefit is it's line of sight, but as survival, you're melee, and I don't really think you care too much. So it's just going to be whichever circle does more damage. For these Covenant abilities. Endurance conduits are defense. So Harmony of the Tortollan, your aspect of the turtle is reduced by 10 seconds. You get that legendary that also reduces the cooldown. Who knows? You might be able to get that turtle down to a pretty low cooldown, and hunters don't have a lot of sustain right now. So that could be a good one to go as a 1-2. Marksman's advantage. Hunter's Mark decreases the damage the target deals to you by 3%. That seems pretty good in PvP, especially as it ranks up and it becomes more and more damage. So if you're hitting a high priority target like a mage, and the mage wants to kill you, and they're just doing 10% less damage to you as this ranks up, that seems really good. PvE, you probably don't want the target with Hunter's Mark hitting you, because even if it reduces the damage to 3%, you're already probably dead. So this is pretty much, to me, only a niche use in PvP. Rejuvenating Wind. Exhilaration heals you for an additional 10% of your maximum health over 8 seconds. It's good, but Exhilaration is already pretty long cooldown. I would think that you get more value from damage reduction at all times than a little bit of an extra heal in PvP. In PvE, you don't have much sustain, so it's still nice there. If you think your healer is not going to be able to do much work, then this would help them out. Resilience of the Hunter. When Feign Death ends, the damage you take is reduced by 3% for until cancelled. So you just at all times taking 3%. Well, then why would you want 3% only from one person when you could feign death and you're taking 3% at all times? Someone please, if I'm reading that wrong, please tell me in the comments. But the way that this reads is that after you feign death, you're taking 3% damage until you cancel the 3%, or until the feign death ends, because then, but it says when it ends, you take the reduced damage. So it makes it sound like it's permanent. After you feign death, you're just taking 3% less damage. So why would you want to limit the damage reduction to only one target at 3% when you could just take 3% less? Okay. Finesse, this is the last part of it. So utility, Cheetah's Vigor. Aspect of Cheetah's secondary movement speed lasts an additional 3 seconds and the cooldown is reduced. Could have good synergies with the honor talents to reduce the cooldown if you want to get your healer in for crowd control. But let's look at the rest of them to make sure if that would even really be an option. Usually you're only going to go for one finesse conduit or one finesse socket that you're putting in. Reversal of Fortune, Beastmaster Marksmanship, successfully interrupting an enemy, so we don't care about that. We care about muzzle. If you interrupt them with muzzle, you get one focus. It's kind of similar to like the Skull Bash synergy for Feral, where you get a bit of extra damage. You reset the tie. It's not as good. It's like really minor compared to that version of it, but that's what it is. Tactical Retreat, disengage, slows nearby enemies by 20%. This is Vengeful Retreat from Demon Hunters. You literally just take, that's just taking it away from Havoc, and there's a coming soon one, so we still don't know. If you wanted a tiny bit of extra damage, it would be here. You already have slows, and you're usually playing with classes that have slows, so it seems a little bit unnecessary. And I think that getting your Cheetah faster, especially in PvE, this would be better. It just gets you back on the target faster. And then with honor talents, you can benefit your team more, unless this one that's coming soon ends up being really sick. So to me, Survival Hunter is already, it's still just the same kind of spec it was in BFA, which I thought looked like a lot of fun, but I ended up not playing it because of the compositions it was limited to, and my friend pool didn't play those specs, so in PvP I couldn't really play. And then in PvE, everybody wanted BM Hunter, and I didn't want to play BM Hunter, so it was like, do I want to go through the process of finding a raiding guild and then not have friends to play with in PvP and then not be invited to Mythic Plus because I'm not a BM Hunter? Those are the downsides. It's never not looked like a fun spec to me. It's just that with what I have available to myself in the game, I didn't see myself having opportunities to play it. So unless that changes, it's still really fun. And for those players that liked it in Battle for Azeroth, it's just getting improved. It's a little bit lame that the legendaries are basically just the Azerite powers. But if you enjoyed it in BFA, you're certainly going to continue to enjoy it. And you've got those old synergies coming back with being able to remove magic debuffs and warriors being able to get rid of ice blocks. So maybe you do have more composition options. But for myself personally, it might be too much of a risk to consider switching as a main. It might be an alt that I pick up later on after seeing if that comes to fruition. But that's going to be it for Survival Hunter. I hope you enjoyed the video and you have a great day.